What is the greatest mess you have ever witnessed? In college, some guys all took shits in the same toilet and then put a huge firework in it and exploded the toilet. We saw them running out of the toilets and up the corridor laughing, then shortly afterwards heard this almighty bang. Myself and a couple of others went in to see WTF happened. Literal shit show.
That sounds wild. It's crazy what people will do for a laugh. I can't imagine the mess they left behind. It must have been a mix of chaos and disbelief when everyone realized what just happened. Those guys probably thought they were legends for a moment. Definitely a story they'd tell for years, but not something anyone would want to clean up. Fun times in college, I guess.
Walking back to my car one night after a performance and heard shouting from the nearby parking lot. As it turns out, several drunk guys had locked the keys in their car, and one equally smashed girlfriend was screaming at them because they were idiots. Then she grabbed a rock and smashed the window of this very expensive-looking car. All of them started screaming, and just then campus police showed up and I left. I later found out from a friend who worked with campus police that all of them were so drunk they were at the wrong vehicle and, as such, had to pay for the damages.
That sounds like a chaotic night. I can picture the scene vividly. Just a bunch of clueless folks making a bad situation worse. It's wild how quickly things escalated. A rock through a window usually doesn't end well. And the fact that they weren't even at their own car? That's just ridiculous. Definitely a story they'll remember for a long time, probably not in the way they wanted. Just another night, I guess.
Well, we were at Chili's for lunch, and this teenager was apparently on a first date with a girl. He mentioned it to the waiter about 15 times, and he was seriously being so horrible. We were just creeping and hearing his shit. The shit was as follows: interrupted her every time she spoke, started playing Pokemon Go and telling her she was dumb for not playing, sprawled himself out in the booth and was lying down, tried and failed hitting on the waitress. Mentioned that college is for nerds, was wearing a wife beater, and definitely skipped all arm and leg days. It was horrible.
That sounds like a classic case of someone not getting the date vibe. The kid clearly had no idea how to handle being around someone he liked. It's wild how some people can make a simple lunch so uncomfortable. The whole situation probably made everyone around cringe a bit. Hopefully, the girl realized she deserves way better than that and can laugh it off later. Just a rough start for him, I guess.
Every single case I deal with in the Coast Guard is generally a shit show. This July 3rd, I got a call at 1 in the morning about a 30-foot boat out of gas, and we were sent searching for it. I already had been out for 6-ish hours, so I was tired. Find them 5 miles off shore, flashing a flashlight. 7 people on the boat, one being a 16-year-old kid. One drunk guy is paddling within or telling us if we have to charge them to tow them back in to just take the kids and women, and they will paddle 5 miles back. The man was obviously shit-faced. He then tried to stand up to grab something from the boat, falling down, where we realized he had a broken/hurt ankle. The operator had a bucket of beer under the wheel, DUI/BUI. So we make preps to tow them back in, and as we were towing them, and they decided to take shots. Get back, and the operator blows over the legal limit, but tries to argue that isn't fair because he wasn't operating when we came out finding them paddle. Just a real shit show. I ended up out till 6 in the morning.
That's a pretty wild night. Dealing with people like that can be exhausting. It's surprising how reckless some can be on the water. I once had a friend who thought it was a good idea to take a boat out with a few drinks. Ended up stranded. We had to call for help too. Not quite the same level of chaos, but still a hassle. Just goes to show some people don't think ahead.
One time, the family was all hanging out in the rec room in my basement. My pug started to take a shit on the floor, so my mom begins to run after him, shaking her finger and yelling, "No, Hank, bad dog." As she's doing this, she trips over the cord to the treadmill and does that hopping on one leg trip as she is falling forward. As she approaches the ground, her pants fall down and she slides shoulder first directly into the pile of dog shit. As our family is roaring in laughter, my dad stands up and does the safe motion like an umpire. It was easily the craziest 3 seconds I have ever witnessed, and we still make fun of her for it.
That sounds like a wild family moment. Can't believe she ended up in that situation. It's funny how those unexpected things can lead to the best stories. Your dad's reaction with this safe motion makes it even better. It's cool to have those memories that keep everyone laughing. Definitely one of those stories that sticks around for a long time. Makes family gatherings a lot more entertaining for sure.
So a friend of mine goes to a family dinner. The problem is, he's kind of an angry drunk and he's 22. He's with his father and mother in something similar to a pub. His father and he get drunk. He gets in an argument with 3 guys. A fight breaks out, he gets a few on the head, and his father intervenes to talk them down. He walks away to get a chair in his hands. Meanwhile, his father is getting beaten. The mother came to try to get them to stop beating her husband. He charges with the chair and throws it onto his mother. Family dinner ended with an ambulance coming to pick the 3 of them up.
That sounds like a wild situation. Family dinners can be tense sometimes, but throwing a chair at your own mom is next level. It's crazy how quickly things can escalate when alcohol is involved. I imagine his parents were pretty shaken up. Hopefully, they all learned something from that night. But yeah, a dinner gone wrong for sure, with an ambulance as the cherry on top.
My God, I've read some crazy wedding stories, but I think this one takes it. Usually, the craziness is just observed, but here you are, living through it in the worst way. I equate it not watching a train wreck, but actually being in the train wreck. Except you can't die or get hurt, but can only watch it all crumble before you.
That sounds rough. I remember a friend's wedding where everything went wrong. The DJ failed to show up, and it started pouring rain during the outdoor ceremony. Guests were slipping, and instead of walking down the aisle, the bride was just trying not to fall. It felt surreal, like we were all just watching this disaster unfold, unable to do anything but laugh nervously and hope for the best. Definitely a memorable experience, but not in the way they wanted.
Speaking of yelling at vets with one arm, one time while I was in the Army, we were doing a company run for PT, so about 100 of us running down a trail in the woods together. We started to pass another group of runners going the opposite direction. Someone up front notices a guy at the end of the group going past, has his right sleeve rolled up on his uniform coat. We begin to heckle and chastise him as we run past for being out of uniform and doing whatever the fuck he wants. Someone at the end of our group then notices this dude is missing his right arm and is running with the Wounded Warriors group. We turned the entire company around and apologized one by one to this poor guy. Luckily, he just laughed it off.
That's a wild story. It shows how quick we can be to judge without understanding the full picture. It's good that you guys turned around to apologize. That takes humility. Plus, it's nice that the guy had a sense of humor about it. Not everyone would. It's a reminder to be more aware of what others might be going through, even in a tough environment like the Army.
Damn, just the image of a closed 4-man tent falling into the water in the dark scares me. It would envelop you and slowly sink. Would you be too weak to rip open the tent fabric and escape? Or maybe I gotta find the zip. One little bar of metal in the claustrophobic, slowly sinking tent. Oh, what did I mention I have a fear of drowning too? Thanks, Opie, you just invented a new phobia.
That sounds pretty intense. I remember going camping once, and we had a storm roll in. The tent was shaking, and I couldn't help but think what would happen if it flooded. I couldn't relax, just kept checking the sides to make sure water wasn't creeping in. It's strange how quickly your mind goes to the worst-case scenario when you're in a cramped space like that. Definitely not a great feeling.
That happened here with a frigate, I think. It ran aground on a reef just outside of Pearl Harbor. The Navy got a huge fine for destroying the reef, plus another one for dumping sewage off the boat, which they did intentionally to lighten it so it could float off the reef. You'd think you could avoid that sort of thing in a ship as maneuverable as a frigate, especially in one of the most trafficked ports in the world. The worst part is that the ship was stuck in plain view of the entire city for like a week. You could see it from anywhere in town.
Sounds like a rough situation for the Navy. It's surprising how something like that can happen, especially in a busy area like Pearl Harbor. I can imagine people looking at it for days, just waiting for something to happen. It's a reminder that even skilled crews can make mistakes, and the consequences are often public. Glad I wasn't on that ship.
I got to witness an awful first date while working at Olive Garden. Man notices that waitress has a small tattoo on her arm, tiny black heart. He launches into a rant about how having visible tattoos makes you less employable, and thus it is a stupid and irresponsible thing to do. Girl tries to interject, explaining that people should have freedom of expression regarding their bodies. Guy starts talking right over her and goes on and on trying to illustrate his view. I started passing by the table / finding things to do near the table just to eavesdrop. Guy went on his rant for a full 25 minutes. Girl had long given up and was just staring out into space, making sporadic attempts to change the subject matter. The man could not get a fucking clue. They split the bill, and then she agreed to meet him again soon.
That's wild. I can't believe he didn't see how uncomfortable she was. It's strange how some people just don't get social cues. I would have thought she'd be done after that. Guess some might feel they need to give it another chance or something. But after a whole date of that guy ranting, I'm not sure what she'd see in him. It's just awkward all around.
Went out to dinner with a bunch of people recently to a very nice steakhouse, and someone's little brother sounded just like that kid. He sat at the table playing Pokemon Go the entire time, speaking loudly to himself and the Pokemon. Get the fuck out of here with that. We both know I caught you. Ordered a cheeseburger with nothing but meat and cheddar only, and then complained that his burger was bland and he would rather be at McDonald's.
That sounds like a typical dinner with a group. There's always one person who just doesn't fit the vibe. Playing Pokemon Go and talking to themselves like that is kind of amusing, though. The burger order is a classic too, simple but still managing to be bland. It's funny how some people would rather be somewhere else, even at a nice place. Makes you appreciate the variety in the group.
They drove home in stony silence, and when they pulled into her driveway, he refused to help her out of the car. He was being so unreasonable, she fumed to herself. She opened the door indignantly and stepped into her driveway with her chin up and her lips set. Whirling around, she slammed the door as hard as she could, and then she screamed. Her boyfriend leapt out of the car and caught her in his arms. "What is it? What's wrong?" he shouted. Then he saw it, a bloody shard embedded in the handle of the passenger side door.
This reminds me of a time when a friend of mine had a rough day. We were driving home after an argument, and things got tense. When we finally stopped, there was this awkward silence. Then out of nowhere, she slammed the door and just screamed. It was unexpected, but I figured it was her way of releasing the pressure. I had to make sure she was okay afterward. Sometimes people just need to let it out.
I think it must be a personal preference. Everyone's different when they get messy drunk. I know of one person who habitually poops himself when he drinks too much, and another person who will, without fail, pee in his own or somebody else's wardrobe when overly refreshed. As for me, I sleepwalk after having had only a small amount of alcohol and amuse my wife with gibberish as I search for things around the house.
We all have our quirks when drinking. I had a friend who would get really chatty and just suddenly lose his train of thought mid-sentence. It was funny because you just watch him stare off into space. As for me, I just get tired and end up falling asleep on the couch, usually with snacks all over me. It's a pretty chill way to handle things.
And LAX is the worst airport of them all. I've been to a lot of airports. I've been in an airport where the entire computer system was shut down and it was just full of luggage because there was no computer telling the agents where to direct the baggage. I've had a 12-hour layover, alone, in an airport overnight. I've had 15 minutes to get off one plane and board another. I've had to run through an airport with about 50 other people on a school trip because not only was our plan leave by time pushing it, we also waited 15 minutes for one kid to show up, even though we were told beforehand we would wait for no one. But fucking LAX. LAX is the worst airport. Even when things go smoothly, it still sucks there. I like airports when nothing goes wrong, though.
I've had my share of airport experiences. I remember a time at a tiny airport where everything was fine until they misplaced my bag. I just had to sit there while they figured it out. Then there was another time when delays piled up, and I ended up wandering aimlessly for hours. It's funny how chaotic airports can be, but when everything goes right, they can feel pretty nice. Still, LAX just stands out as a hassle.
Holy shit. In my last apartment, which I shared with my boyfriend at the time, who was a cop, we had a lesbian couple living in our building. One night while my ex was at work, he called to tell me to stay inside and not even leave to let the dogs out. Turns out they got into an argument, and one of them threatened to leave. The other slit her own wrist and was running around with a knife, while carrying the child they had together to keep her girlfriend from leaving her. I'm pretty sure they actually worked it out, but there was blood staining the stairs for months afterwards.
That sounds intense. Living in an apartment can lead to some wild stuff. It's crazy how quickly things can escalate in relationships. I mean, dealing with a situation like that, especially with kids involved, is pretty heavy. I can see why your ex wanted you to stay inside. And the aftermath with the blood? That must have been a reminder of the chaos for a while. Just another day in the neighborhood, I guess.
My son had norovirus. He was so sick. Poor kid. He puked and crapped until there was nothing left. He turned quite pale. He was lethargic, and he wasn't hungry. We took him to the doctor, and they gave him an 4. You could see his color change back. It was damn near miraculous. He went from being dehydrated and listless to normal within minutes. Then he said, "I feel better, boy, am I hungry?" And he was back.
That sounds tough. Seeing your kid like that must have been rough. The rapid change after the 4 is impressive. It's wild how quick kids can bounce back. I'm glad he's okay now and back to his normal self. Kids have a way of making everything feel better with just a little bit of energy. It's good to hear a positive ending to a rough situation.
The moms are trying to have the wedding they always wanted, but couldn't because their mom was trying to have the wedding she always wanted. It's a vicious cycle edit. Obligatory thank you for the gold. I would like to take this moment to thank my mother for crying when I got engaged because she hadn't had her face lift yet.
It's interesting how family expectations can mess with what people really want. Weddings can become more about satisfying others than celebrating love. I've seen similar situations where someone's dream gets overshadowed by the past. And yeah, parents can have their own agendas that complicate things. The whole crying over a lift thing is kinda funny though. Just highlights how some things really matter to people.
I got pink eye in basic, and they sent me to the dispensary to get checked out. I'm sitting there reading my BMTM2 with one good, I like a good airman, and a TI on the other side sees me with my eye closed and comes stomping over and yelling at me to wake up. I knew he was over there and was looking my way and could have given some indication that I wasn't actually asleep, but turned to look at him innocently with puffy, goo-encrusted eyes while he was yelling and watching his face as he realized his mistake was one of my best moments in basic. A guy I was in med hold with had an even better one. He was getting discharged for a previously undiagnosed heart condition that training had exacerbated. He'd stopped to tie his shoe or something while walking with his cardiologist, and a TI just saw a recruit approach an officer without saluting and started in with the usual screaming routine. The doctor, a brigadier general, calmly turned and asked the TI to explain just what the hell he thought he was doing, screaming at his heart patient.
That sounds like a rough time in basic. It's funny how things like that can turn into memorable moments. You trying to look innocent, and that TI realizing his mistake must have been quite the scene. The guy with the cardiologist had a wild experience too. Getting yelled at by a TI when you're in a vulnerable spot like that adds a whole other layer. At least you've got some stories to tell.
A girl in my class died when I was in grade 2. She was a really sweet, friendly girl. She had a hole in her heart. It was really sad. Everyone in the class spent the afternoon crying in little huddles on the floor. My mom wouldn't let me go to the funeral because she thought it would be too sad for me. I now know she was completely right.
That's a tough memory. It's hard to process loss at such a young age. Losing a classmate shakes everyone up, especially when they're kind and young. It's understandable your mom kept you from the funeral. Protecting kids from the heaviness of grief sometimes helps. Reflecting on it now, it shows how important those early connections can be, even if they don't last long. Sad memories can stick with you for sure.
This reminds me of my uncle, who as a kid apparently had this problem with farting and laughing. When he was nervous or laughing, he tended to let little farts slip. He would then find these amusing, causing him to laugh more. I think you can see where this is going. My mom said her and the rest of their siblings were merciless with him, constantly trying to make him laugh at school or when they had guests around, etc.
That's a classic childhood story. Kids can be pretty brutal. Your uncle must have had a tough time with that. It's funny how something like that can turn into a whole thing among siblings. The more they made him laugh, the worse it got. I can just picture the chaos during family gatherings. It's strange how those little moments stick with us. Makes you appreciate the awkward phases of growing up.
Yeah, I really nailed it. Started projectile vomiting from the foot of the bed while he was in the bed and ended up throwing myself at him while I was still throwing up. Covered him, the bed, and the nightstand. Now he thinks it's funny and gets kind of gory with the details. I keep telling him if I hadn't been such a daddy's girl, I would have hit mom first. I was 4, I'm still a daddy's girl at 52.
That sounds like quite the event. It's interesting how these moments can turn into funny stories later on. I guess your friend found a way to laugh about it, even if it was messy at the time. Being a daddy's girl for so long must have its own charm, too. It's cool how those childhood memories stick with us, even into adulthood.
Pretty much this. My mom had a shotgun wedding, and weddings are a sore spot for her. She was really jealous when her parents paid for my aunt's wedding and was kind of a downer the whole time with it. She took pretty much complete control of my wedding and tried to convince me to have a double wedding so she and my dad could renew their vows. When I refused, she was especially pissed off about it. It put a huge strain on our relationship during the entire planning of the wedding. She calmed down a lot afterwards, thankfully.
It sounds like a tough situation. Weddings can bring out a lot of emotions, especially with family. Your mom's feeling about her own wedding seems to have impacted yours heavily. It's good that things calmed down afterward, but that kind of stress during planning is no joke. Keeping open communication might help for future family events. Overall, tough moments like this can shape relationships, for better or worse.
Speaking of people getting angry at others for having an eye condition, when I was 5, a botfly laid an egg in my face next to my right eye. When it hatched, the resulting swelling caused my eye to be forced closed. About the same time, a family with a 6-year-old moved in next door. The first time I met him, he told me to open my eye. I tried to explain to him that I couldn't, something was wrong, and it had swelled shut. At this point, we didn't know that I had a larva growing in my face yet. He took exception to this and punched me in the nose.
That's one wild story. As a kid, you don't really get it when something's off. The other kid's reaction makes sense though. I guess he thought you were just kidding. Getting punched in the nose just for that is pretty rough. It's weird how kids react to things they don't understand. That whole situation must have been confusing and painful on many levels, both physically and socially.
Speaking of yelling at people with one arm, while working for Target, I saw a man pushing a large box up to the front of the store with his feet. I hurried up behind him and sort of sternly said, "Sir, we really don't appreciate you kicking our merchandise around the store. Do you need a hand?" He turns around and, of course, one arm, looked me dead in the eye and said, "Yes, in fact, I do need a hand. What aisle are they in?" I slunk away.
That's a solid moment. You think you're helping, trying to be stern, and then you get hit with that response. Definitely puts you in your place. It's wild how a simple encounter can turn things around so quickly. Sometimes you just gotta laugh it off and keep moving. Makes you think twice before jumping in next time.
I too knew a 6-year-old with one arm. He was the sweetest little boy, and though he needed some help with Legos, he generally did fine. He adapted early since he was born without an arm. However, despite this fact, parents decided to name him, of all things, Hans. Hans? Like, why did they make that decision?
It's interesting how names can shape perceptions. I once met a guy named Miles, who was really into running but had a tough time keeping up with his friends. We joked about it a lot. Sometimes, I wonder if names carry expectations. Naming a kid Hans who has a unique situation feels a bit off. But I guess it doesn't change who he is or how he adapts to life.
Speaking of teachers who yell with only one arm, my grade 2 teacher only had one arm, thalidomide, and my mom was worried that I would say something inappropriate, so she lectured me about it. Then in a parent-teacher interview, my mom responds to something by saying, "I bet that cost an arm and a leg." She realized what she said and apologized profusely. Mrs. K took it all in stride. She was a stern but great teacher.
That's an interesting story. It's funny how one little comment can create such an awkward moment. But it sounds like Mrs. K had a good sense of humor about it. Teachers like that can really make a big difference, even if they come off as strict. Shows how important it is to handle things with grace, especially when life throws unexpected situations at you.
The wife babysat a kid, 11-ish, who had several mini-strokes during birth, leaving him with a limp and claw-like hands. She never took any shit from him. "Help me do X." "You could do it yourself. Now hurry up." "Can you help me tie my shoes?" "Well, your arm's broken." "Looking down, yes." "Oh yeah, right."
That sounds like a tough situation. It's interesting how some people don't let challenges define their actions. It's like she saw right through any excuse and pushed him to be independent. I can relate to that tough love approach. Sometimes, you need someone to remind you that you can handle things on your own, even when it feels overwhelming. It's a good way to build resilience.
I've had an experience with this sort of thing, except the mother was an alcoholic. The cops visited frequently, but never really knew or did anything about the baby. Her older son's therapist finally reported it, and she started to get some real help. I recommend making the call, just to be safe. Growing up in a broken home is an awful thing. Just my 2 cents.
It sounds like a tough situation. It's hard to see someone struggling and feel helpless. Sometimes the right people need to step in for change to happen. Taking that step to report something like this can be really important. No one should have to grow up in an unhealthy environment. It's good that the therapist took action, though. In the end, seeking help can make a big difference for everyone involved.
When I was 16, we were playing the board game Life, and my car landed on the elope tile. When I read out what it said, my mother said, "You're getting eloped," in the most mortified voice she's ever used. She knew 100% that it was in the game. I said it meant I could spend less money in the game and real life, so it was a good thing. She said, "You better not get eloped." Apparently, that's her decision.
That's a funny story. It's interesting how such a simple game can trigger strong reactions. Your mom's response shows how protective she is, even over a game. It's kind of amusing that she got so serious about something that was just meant to be lighthearted. But at least you found a way to make it a positive spin in the game and in life. I guess that's how parents can be sometimes.
My grandparents' back in my day stories always revolved around how cheap things were. One day, when my grandma was complaining about the price of something, I asked her how much her family got paid back then. Grandma blushed a bit and said under her breath something that equated to less than $1 an hour. A few weeks later, she was back to complaining about inflation again. They also never used to throw anything out. Half the food in their house was expired. My mom and I would toss it when they weren't looking, but if we got caught, it was ugly. My mom said it had to do with Grandma being around during the Great Depression and having no food.
That sounds pretty relatable. Older generations often have really unique perspectives on money and resources. I remember my own grandparents talking about how they saved everything too. They believed in making something out of nothing. It's funny how things change, but certain habits stick with people. The expired food thing is common, for sure. Sometimes it felt like a mini battle just to throw something away without getting in trouble.
I too knew a 6-year-old with only one arm. And when I say only one arm, I mean only one arm, missing an arm and both legs. I was assigned his kindergarten class in my free period to help out, and he was the coolest little kid ever though, especially as he grew up, small town, so I saw him plenty through the years, which was awesome.
That sounds like a memorable experience. It's great that you got to be around someone with such a unique view on life. Kids can surprise you in how they adapt and make the best of their situations. It's nice to hear he grew up well, too. Those kind of experiences often shape your perspective on resilience and strength in others. Thanks for sharing that.
My wife and I got engaged, and when we told everyone we wanted a small wedding that was very low-key, her parents laughed and said that was unrealistic. I told them they could pay for it 100% and plan every last detail then, and I would just show up. It worked out pretty nicely. I still didn't wear a suit.
That's a pretty chill approach to the whole wedding thing. It's cool that you found a way to make it work for you both. Letting her parents plan everything took the pressure off, and it's funny you still didn't get into a suit. Shows you just wanted to keep it relaxed. Sometimes just showing up is all that really matters.
I had to remind her it wasn't just our family that would be there, and his family didn't want to watch them renew their vows. She didn't really seem to care and kept saying she never had a wedding and couldn't renew her vows the year before because my brother got accepted into an Ivy League school and she couldn't do it that year because she was paying for my wedding, so she thought hijacking my wedding was the amicable solution. It was insane, and my brother and dad both backed her up in her argument. I almost severed ties, but after the wedding passed, she calmed down a lot, and now we're closer than ever. I think they decided to renew their vows next year.
That's a tough situation. It's strange how some people can't see the bigger picture. Your friend was focused on her own wants without considering how it affected everyone else. It's good that things have settled down now and you're closer. Sometimes, events like these can really test relationships. At least they've decided to plan their vow renewal for next year. It gives them something to look forward to.
Please consider subscribing if you enjoyed. Love.